imagine for a second curing an illness. And I mean, not with a pill or, not with surgery, and definitely not with months of grueling physical therapy.
Right.
But just by sitting quietly and reading a 4-line poem.
It sounds completely impossible.
It sounds like a fairy tale. Like in our modern hyper-rational world, we think of words as just, symbols on a screen or ink on a page.
Yeah, exactly. Just data transfer into the brain.
Right. But what if we've completely forgotten like a technology of reading where words aren't just symbols? Like what if in a very specific context, words are literal biological instructions that can physically unlock pathways in your body?
Which really challenges the entire foundation of how we, view the boundary between the mind and the body. We generally treat reading as this entirely cognitive event, completely isolated from our physiology. But when you step into the world of ancient somatic practices, that clean line it totally dissolves.
And that is the exact boundary we are crossing today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we are looking at a fascinating, really brief text published back on May 1st, 2021.
Right.
And it's by an author known as Tao and the World. Now, the source is categorized under a very specific and I think super intriguing label. It's called a reading cultivation methods.
And that categorization alone is just incredibly revealing. Because in traditional Chinese thought, a gongfa, or a cultivation method, it implies an operational manual.
Okay.
It's an active discipline, right? It's designed to transform the practitioner's physical and energetic state. So it's not literary criticism.
Yeah.
It's basically a blueprint.
An operational blueprint disguised as a blog post. And the core claim of this text is, it's absolutely wild. The author claims that reciting 4 specific lines of a classic Chinese poem by the Tang Dynasty poet Bai Jui can literally open the human body's meridians, specifically the Ren meridian. And I'll give you a rough translation of these lines. It goes, "Flourishing is the grass on the ancient plain. Every year it withers and thrives again. Wildfire cannot burn it completely away. The spring wind blows and it comes back to life." 4 lines of nature imagery. And supposedly, a major energetic pathway in the body just, boom, opens up.
Which, if you're firmly rooted in a strictly anatomical, Western view of the body, that sounds like pure mysticism.
Why?
But what we're going to see is that when you break down the mechanics of intention and breath and interoception, which is your brain's ability to actually perceive sensations inside your body.
Right.
This becomes an incredibly sophisticated biological process.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to essentially reconstruct this author's personal process. We want to decode the biological and energetic mechanics hidden inside these 4 poetic lines.
Yeah.
And figure out how literary philosophy connects to the literal flow of energy and blood in your body.
What's fascinating here is that to truly understand this, we really have to look past the literal ink on the page. We have to examine the physiological experience of reading itself. We need to look at how rhythm, how deep visual imagery, and how specific mental intent can trigger highly localized physical sensations. Because this isn't magic.
Right.
It's mechanics. It's an alignment of the nervous system that, honestly, we've largely forgotten how to use.
So let's start with how this actually happened for the author. Because they didn't claim to have meditated for a decade in a cave to achieve this.
No, not at all.
They state they were literally just reading this poem, and suddenly they discovered their Ren meridian had opened right along with the words.
Yeah.
And they explicitly described the feeling as magical, which is what prompted them to document the experience in the first place. But they include this massive caveat right at the beginning of the text. They say, not everyone who reads it will achieve this.
And that caveat, honestly, that's the key to the entire text. Because it proves that the power isn't inherently sitting in the words themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Right. If the power were purely in the text, you could just print the poem on a massive billboard and anyone driving past it on the highway would suddenly achieve, energetic enlightenment.
Right.
So the caveat implies that reading cultivation requires a specific internal environment. It's an active, highly integrated physical practice.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. We're talking about reading a poem. How is this not just a fancy way of saying, they drank some nice tea, read some pleasant poetry, felt deeply relaxed, and then just decided to call that relaxed feeling a meridian opening?
Sure.
Reading a good book downshifts my nervous system too, right?
And that's a completely fair skepticism. But relaxation isn't the alternative explanation here. Relaxation is actually the absolute biological prerequisite.
Oh, okay.
We have to differentiate between passive relaxation like, spacing out in front of the television.
Yeah.
And active surrender.
Active surrender. I mean, that sounds like an oxymoron.
It does, but think about the physiological layers of what the author was likely doing here. When you engage in a reading cultivation method, the first law is vocalization.
Even if you're reading silently.
Exactly. Even if it's just sub-vocalization in your mind, you're creating a rhythm. The poem has a very specific cadence, and that cadence begins to entrain your breathing. As your breath slows and deepens to match the meter of the poem, your vagus nerve gets stimulated.
Right. The vagus nerve being like the major superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system, telling the body to rest, digest, and repair.
Precisely. It pulls you out of the sympathetic fight or flight mode. So that's the baseline. But lots of things do that. The second layer is where the actual cultivation part comes in.
Okay.
And that's somatic visualization. So when the author reads about the grass and the winter, the fire, the wind, they aren't picturing a field outside their window.
Wait, they're not?
No, they are projecting that imagery internally.
Right.
The body actually becomes the landscape.
Oh, wow. So the mind is incredibly focused while the body is deeply relaxed.
Yes, and achieving that state requires a very rare alignment. You can't force a meridian open through sheer willpower because, well, willpower creates muscular tension.
Right, you're clenching.
Exactly. And you can't open it by just zoning out either. You have to maintain this razor-sharp mental focus on the imagery while systematically commanding your physical tissues to let go. That is the specific state the author stumbled into through a deep resonance with the text.
So they hit this perfect sweet spot between focus and surrender. But to understand what actually happened next, like what it even means to have a meridian open, we really need to establish some physiological grounding here.
Definitely.
Because the author doesn't just say they felt peaceful, they make incredibly specific physical health claims in the source material. In the text, the author asks a very direct question. Why do conditions like female infertility occur? And they give a definitive, super blunt answer. They say the red meridian is blocked, period. End of sentence.
It is a massive, incredibly definitive claim. And to understand the logic driving that statement, we have to translate the concept of the red meridian, which is often called the conception vessel in traditional Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
We have to translate that into anatomical everyday mechanics. Strip away the mysticism.
Please do, because I think when people hear the word meridian, they instantly picture like glowing mystical lines floating outside the body that only a guru can see.
Right. Let's ground it. Think of the meridian system as a network of rivers and irrigation channels running throughout a massive continent. And that continent is your body.
Okay.
These channels distribute water, which in this context is ki or bioelectrical energy, life force, and blood to different regions. The red meridian isn't just some small side stream. It is the central major river running directly down the exact front midline of your body.
Walk us through the geography of that river. Like, where does it start and where does it go?
It starts at the perineum, so the very base of the pelvic floor. It runs straight out of the front of the abdomen, right through the navel, up through the center of the chest, through the throat, and it actually terminates right below the bottom lip.
So it's literally tracing a line over almost every major vital and endocrine organ?
Yes.
The reproductive organs, the digestive tract, the thymus gland in the chest, the thyroid in the neck.
Exactly. And because of its location on the front of the body, which is the protected, vulnerable side, traditional medicine views the red meridian as the ultimate yin channel.
Yin being?
Yin is the energy of receiving, of cooling, of nurturing, of, holding and sustaining life. It is the primary river responsible for nurturing the deep foundational soil of the human body.
The deep soil being the reproductive and vital organs in the lower abdomen.
Yes. So let's look at the author's blunt claim about female infertility through this exact lens. If we view the body as an ecosystem, what happens if the main irrigation river, the red meridian, gets dammed up by a massive boulder somewhere in the chest or the upper abdomen? What happens downstream?
Well, the water stops flowing. The lower irrigation channels dry up entirely.
Right. And what happens to the soil when it receives no water, no nutrients, no blood flow?
It dries out, it cracks, it becomes totally barren.
Exactly. Life cannot take root in dry, barren soil. So the author's direct causal correlation that infertility occurs because the red meridian is blocked, it actually makes profound logical sense within this specific framework.
Wow.
The central river of nurturing energy is dammed up, meaning the lower body literally does not have the energetic or physiological resources to create and sustain new life. It's not necessarily a localized mechanical failure of an organ, it's a systemic failure of supply.
That completely reframes the entire concept of health. But, you might be listening right now thinking, okay, interesting biology lesson, but I don't struggle with infertility, so how does this apply to me?
Right.
How does a blocked Ren meridian show up in the daily life of just the average person?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of traditional health preservation, which is a concept known as Yangsheng, the flow of qi and blood is what sustains all vitality, not just reproduction.
Okay.
A blockage in the Ren meridian is a stagnation of your core life force. And remember the geography we just mapped out. That river runs all the way from the pelvic floor to the mouth. A blockage anywhere along that line affects everything above and below it.
It makes me think about, modern posture. We sit hunched over keyboards all day, our shoulders are rolled forward, our chests are collapsed. We are physically compressing the exact path of the Ren meridian.
We are structurally building dams. I mean, if that front channel is blocked in the chest, the energy gets trapped. It can't rise to nourish the brain, and it can't descend to ground you in your body.
So for you, the listener, a blocked river might manifest as chronic, inexplicable fatigue. You sleep 8 hours, your blood work is totally fine, but you wake up exhausted because the deep soil of your body isn't being watered. Or it might manifest as chronic brain fog because the energy is stuck in your neck and just isn't reaching your head.
Or, and this is incredibly common these days, it manifests as emotional stagnation.
Oh, yeah?
Think about how many people walk around with a literal feeling of tightness in their chest, a heavy heart, an inability to take a full deep breath. That is a dam right at the heart center. The tissue is physically tight, which means the blood vessels are constricted, which means the energy cannot flow. A physical knot in the fascia is literally an energetic knot.
So the stakes here are actually incredibly high for everyone. We all have a Ren meridian, and thanks to modern stress, we almost all have dams in our rivers.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which brings us to the core mystery of the text. Because if a dammed up Ren meridian is the root problem causing all this stagnation, fatigue, and lack of vitality, how on earth does reading a poem act as the dynamite to clear the dam? How do 4 lines of text blast through physical blockages?
Well, the author doesn't leave us guessing on that. They isolate 2 very specific images from the poem as the active ingredients. And these aren't just pretty metaphors, they are the actual mechanisms of the internal cultivation.
Okay, let's dissect the first of the author's 2 major keys. The flourishing grass, or lily cow. This focuses entirely on raw biological vitality. The author points to the opening lines of the poem. Flourishing is the grass on the ancient plain. Every year it withers and thrives again. And they say, this right here, the flourishing grass, this is key number 1.
And we really have to pause and ask why. Why is grass, of all the things in the natural world, so important for opening a major energetic meridian? Why didn't the poet or the author choose a mighty oak tree or a soaring eagle or, I don't know, a majestic mountain?
Right. Grass is almost too common. We step on it, we mow it, we completely ignore it. It seems way too humble to be the key to a magical physical transformation.
It is humble, but its humility is its power. The flourishing grass represents the body's foundational, indestructible vitality. It represents cellular memory at its most basic, resilient level.
Okay.
Think about it anatomically and ecologically. An oak tree can be chopped down. If you sever its trunk, it dies. An eagle can be shot out of the sky. But grass is a decentralized network.
Ah, right. The part we see is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. It is a vast, interconnected root system that exists entirely beneath the surface, completely safe underground. The visible green blades are just the temporary expression of a permanent underlying life force.
I love that distinction. The visible blades are temporary, but the roots are permanent. And that ties perfectly into the second line of the poem. Every year it withers and thrives again. This is a cycle.
Yes.
And this is where the deep implications for physical and mental health really start to emerge from the text. Because the poem fundamentally acknowledges that decline, the withering phase, is not just natural, it is absolutely inevitable.
Which raises an incredibly important question about how we view health and productivity in the modern world.
Right.
We have developed this pervasive, almost toxic idea that health means remaining perpetually in bloom.
Yes.
We think if we are tired, if we feel sad, if we catch a cold, if we age, it means we are failing.
Yeah.
We view withering as a malfunction of the machine.
It's so true. We treat exhaustion as a character flaw. We drink 3 espresso shots, pop a supplement, and just push through because we think we're supposed to be green, flourishing, and highly productive 365 days a year.
Exactly.
But this reading cultivation practice completely rejects that paradigm. It says every year it withers. The wither is built into the biological code.
And the philosophical meaning here is profound, and it maps directly onto our biology. I mean, our cells undergo apoptosis-programmed cell death just to make way for new cells.
Right.
Our brains need the unconscious darkness of sleep to clean out metabolic waste. True Yangsheng, true health preservation, isn't about fighting off the winter forever. It's not about staying perpetually in bloom. It's about retaining the capacity to bloom again. It's about ensuring the root system survives the wither.
Think about walking through a forest in the dead of winter. You walk through the trees in January, and it looks apocalyptic. The branches are bare, the ground is frozen solid, everything is gray and brown. If you were an alien visiting Earth for the first time, you'd think a catastrophe had wiped out all life.
Right. It looks dead.
But the forest isn't dead, it's conserving. The entire ecosystem has pulled its energy down deep into the earth, into the root systems, just waiting.
That is a perfect analogy for the human body. In our own lives, periods of deep exhaustion, a severe illness, burnout, or, a prolonged period of grief, these are our withering phases.
Yeah.
And when you're in them, they feel like death. They feel like a permanent end state. But the concept of the flourishing grass reminds the practitioner that this is just a phase of a cycle. Your core vitality, the deep potential of your Ren meridian is still there, just underground.
It's reframing survival entirely. As long as the root is intact, you haven't lost. But okay, here's where it gets really interesting though. Because roots need a catalyst to grow again. They can't just stay dormant forever or they eventually will die.
Right.
And the poem doesn't just leave us in the cold winter. It introduces a massive obstacle and then it provides a savior, which leads us to the author's second key.
The transition from potential stored energy back into kinetic moving energy.
Yes. Let's look at the wildfire and the spring wind. This is where we explore the actual mechanism of movement and healing in the text and where the author lays down the ultimate challenge for us. The poem continues. Wildfire cannot burn it completely away. The spring wind blows and it comes back to life. The author highlights spring wind blows as the absolute second key. In fact, they summarize the entire practice, the whole secret to opening the meridian, in one synthesized phrase, they say. Spring wind blows the flourishing grass.
Let's break down this imagery, starting with the wildfire. Because before the wind can blow and bring new life, the grass has to actually survive the fire. The wildfire represents the extremes of human experience. It represents the severe stressors, the acute diseases, the deep emotional traumas that ravage the body and the mind.
Wow.
Physiologically, you can think of the wildfire as runaway inflammation. It is the sympathetic nervous system stuck in overdrive, just flooding the body with cortisol until it scorches the earth.
Burnout is the perfect modern equivalent. I mean, we literally use the word burn to describe what happens when we exhaust our adrenal resources. We feel like we are burned to ash. There is nothing left.
But look at what the poem insists. Wildfire cannot burn it completely away. The deep life force, the root system we just talked about, survives even the most scorching trauma.
That's beautiful.
And that is the foundational trust you must cultivate in your own body before this practice can work.
You have to believe on a cellular level that your root is unburnable. Okay, so the field is burned, but the root survives. Now we need the catalyst. Enter the spring wind. The author says this is the ultimate key. Why the spring wind? What does the wind represent inside the human body?
From a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, spring is associated with the wood element, with the liver meridian, with upward and outward movement, and, with resurrection.
Okay.
The spring wind is the flowing qi. Most tangibly, it is your breath. It is the rejuvenating, invisible energy that sweeps through the stagnant, burned-out system and signals to the dormant roots. The fire is over. It is safe to grow now.
The wind is the breath. That is so immediate and tangible. When you take a deep, intentional breath right down into your belly, it literally feels like a breeze moving through your internal landscape.
Yes, but this is where we reach the absolute crux of the source text. This is where it goes from a nice poetic idea to a rigorous physical discipline. The author says something incredibly telling.
What's that?
They write, and I quote, "Actually, letting the spring wind blow through the body unimpeded, that is the very difficult thing."
Unimpeded. That's the magic word right there.
It is the whole game, because the wind is always blowing. As long as you are alive, your breath is moving. The potential for healing is always present, but it is hitting walls. Let's deeply analyze this unimpeded imagery. What impedes the wind? Internal resistance.
Think of it like, think of your body as a house with all its doors and windows shut tight. Reading the poem or understanding it intellectually is like opening the front door.
Right.
But if the internal doors, like the hallway doors, the bedroom doors, are closed because of stress or physical tension, the wind just comes in the front door and hits a wall. Opening the meridian means opening every single internal door so the breeze flows straight through the entire house.
That's a great way to look at it. Or think of it like a kink in a garden hose. The water, which is the breath, the chi, the spring wind, is flowing from the tap. The pressure is there. But if there is a sharp kink in the middle of the hose, the water just stops. You can't fix it by turning up the water pressure at the tap. If you do that, the hose will just bulge and eventually burst. The only way to get the water to flow unimpeded to the garden is to walk down the length of the hose and physically unkink it.
Oh, I love that mechanistic analogy because it perfectly illustrates what happens in the body. The kinks in our internal hose are both physical and mental. Physical tension like tight shoulders pulling up to your ears, a clenched jaw, a rigid diaphragm, a hardened, sucked-in belly, and the mental blocks that cause them, anxiety, fear, overthinking, holding on to past grief. Every single one of these emotional states creates a physical fascial restriction in the body. Every single one is a kink in the hose blocking the spring wind.
So reading the poem, just intellectually understanding the words is like turning on the tap. You get the intention flowing. But if your internal hose is kinked because of your stress or your physical tension, the wind just hits a wall in your chest. It can't circulate down to the deep roots in your lower abdomen. Opening the red meridian, letting the wind flow unimpeded, means you have to use your mind to systematically locate and unkink every single restriction along that front channel.
Exactly. It highlights the active nature of the surrender we talked about earlier. You have to consciously scan your own body. If you are clenching your stomach because you are stressed about an upcoming deadline, that pathway is kinked. The spring wind of your breath will only reach your upper chest, hit that tension, and bounce back out.
Yes.
The lower abdomen, where the deep roots of the Ren meridian lie, remains dry, unwatered, and entirely dormant.
Which is exactly why it's so difficult.
So understanding the theory is one thing. The imagery is beautiful, the biology makes sense, the garden hose analogy tracks. But how do we practically apply this? If I'm sitting down right now with this poem, how do I actually unkink the hose? Let's get incredibly practical here. I want to ask you directly about the actual how-to of this poetic cultivation.
Let's map the territory. What's your first scenario?
Okay, scenario 1. I am sitting down. I am reading the line, "Spring wind blows the flourishing grass." When the author says that, how should I actually feel that when I'm reciting it? What is the actual somatic tracking happening in my body?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of somatic tracking, it's about following the sensation of your breath as if it were a physical, heavy object.
Okay.
As you read the word spring wind, you don't just think of a nice breeze outside your house. You visualize and literally feel the air entering your nostrils. You feel the coolness of it. You track its descent down the back of your throat. You feel it move into the upper chest, expanding the sternum. And this is where you must intentionally guide it. You track that sensation down through the solar plexus, past the navel, and deep into the lower abdomen, the pelvic bowl. You have to visualize your breath as a warm wind, physically sweeping down the exact path of the red meridian, coaxing the grass, your dormant internal vitality back to life.
Wow.
You should feel a gentle physical expansion, a warmth, a literal loosening of the tissues in the lower belly.
Okay, so it's a highly localized, downward-moving physical sensation. But that leads perfectly to my next question. The author explicitly says it's very difficult to let this wind pass unimpeded. Why? Why is taking a deep breath and picturing wind so incredibly hard to translate into a physical feeling of flow? What is stopping us on a daily basis?
In short, the modern condition, we are fundamentally trapped in our heads. Think about your daily life. Information overload, endless emails, smartphone notifications, the chaotic 24-hour news cycle.
It never stops.
It doesn't. And when we are constantly processing cognitive data, our blood flow, our nervous system activity, our chi, rushes up to the brain to handle the load. We become energetically top-heavy.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
This creates massive tension in the upper body,
Yeah.
specifically in the suboccipital muscles at the base of the skull, the jaw, the neck, and the chest. We live in a constant state of low-grade fight or flight, which physically causes the diaphragm to freeze in place to brace for impact. So when you try to take that deep breath, when you try to let the spring wind blow, The hose is already kinked in 5 different places before the air even reaches your stomach. The tension blocks it.
It's so true. I mean, you tell someone who is stressed to take a deep breath, and what do? Their shoulders hike up to their ears, their chest puffs out, and their neck strains. They breathe up instead of down.
Exactly. They're pulling the wind up into the attic instead of letting it blow down into the foundation. It is difficult to do this practice because unkinking that hose requires you to let go of the hypervigilance that modern society demands of you.
Yeah.
You have to soften your belly, which we were told to constantly suck in. You have to drop your shoulders. It feels vulnerable to relax your front line. It actually feels unsafe to drop your armor.
Wow. It feels unsafe to drop the armor. That is the core of it. Which brings me to the final practical question. If you can do it, if you can drop the armor, unkink the hose, and let the wind flow all the way down, how does this specific cycle in the poem, the withering, the burning, the blowing, the growing, how does that sublimate our spiritual state? Like, how does it change who we are on a psychological level?
It creates a fundamental paradigm shift. It shifts the practitioner from a state of chronic fear to a state of profound trust. When you are disconnected from your body, you spend your entire life worrying about the wildfire.
Right.
You obsess over stress, potential diseases, financial crises, the aging process. You live in terror of the wither. But when you practice this cultivation, when you physically feel your breath, the wind reach deep into your abdomen and awaken the warmth of the grass down the Ren Meridian, you have a physical, undeniable experience of your own resilience.
You prove to your own nervous system that you are unburnable.
Yes. You realize the wildfire is inevitable, but it is not the end of the story. The energy moving smoothly through the Ren Meridian physically grounds this emotional realization. It takes the intellectual, cognitive concept of "I will be okay" and turns it into a somatic reality. My body physically knows how to survive this and grow again.
That's amazing.
That is the sublimation. It elevates you from merely surviving the world to trusting the inherent cycle of life.
So what does this all mean when we bring all these elements together? Let's form a final holistic view of the author's experience, because this is the climax of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
The author concludes the text by simply stating that feeling the Ren Meridian open alongside the rhythm of the poem was magical, and they felt compelled to write it down to share with the world. We've talked about the anatomy, the vagus nerve, the imagery, the kinks in the hose. But what is the ultimate synthesis? Why did it feel magical?
It felt magical because of a phenomenon we can call resonance, or gongming in Chinese philosophy. True resonance in the human system is incredibly rare.
What does that mean exactly?
It happens when your cognitive mind deeply, completely understands a universal truth. In this case, the truth of indestructible life and flowing energy. And simultaneously, your physical body perfectly mirrors that exact truth in its physiology.
Oh, wow. So the mind and the body are playing the exact same chord at the exact same time.
Precisely. The mind holds the vivid image of the unburnable grass and the sweeping spring wind, and the body perfectly executes the smooth downward flow of breath along the relaxed Ren Meridian without a single ounce of fascial resistance.
Right.
When those two realities, the mental visualization and the physical sensation, synthesize perfectly, it produces a physiological state that feels transcendent. The nervous system aligns. It feels like magic.
But as we've established today, it's not magic in the supernatural waving a wand sense.
No, not at all. It is the absolute peak biological alignment of intention, breath, and linguistic imagery. It is what happens when the human nervous system is tuned like a master instrument. That is the true hidden mechanism of a reading cultivation method. It uses ancient literature not just as a story, but as the tuning fork to align the body's energy pathways.
And I want to connect this right back to you listening right now, because whether you are prepping for a high-stakes meeting, whether you're trying to recover from a long illness, or whether you are just trying to unwind on your commute home, the principle we've unpacked today holds absolutely true.
Definitely.
Acknowledging your own inherent resilience, knowing that your root system, your grass, is deep and unburnable, and consciously allowing your breath, your internal energy, to flow freely like the spring wind. That combination can dramatically alter your physiological state in real time.
It really can.
It can lower your heart rate, clear your brain fog, and unblock the stagnant rivers inside you. You don't have to be a Taoist monk living on a mountain to experience this. You just have to be willing to unkink the hose.
It is a profoundly democratic power.
Yeah.
The meridian is there in all of us. The breath is always there. The capacity to visualize is there.
It really is an incredible journey we've been on today. To summarize, we started with a seemingly simple, almost cryptic text about 4 lines of ancient poetry. And from there, we journeyed through the complex plumbing mechanics of the Ren meridian, understanding how the downward flow of yin energy sustains our core physical vitality. We decoded the metaphor of the flourishing grass, learning that withering is a necessary part of our biological cycle, not a failure. We faced the wildfire of modern stress and inflammation, and we discovered the rejuvenating power of the spring wind, our breath, when it is finally allowed to flow unimpeded through our internal landscape.
Right.
And ultimately, we synthesized how aligning our mental focus with our physical surrender can literally unlock the body.
It transforms the act of reading from passive consumption into active physiological creation.
It absolutely does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I know you had one final thought about how this applies to our modern habits.
I do. It's something for everyone to mull over. We've just spent this time exploring how reading a single poem, 4 lines of positive, cyclical, natural imagery, can act as an energetic key to physically open the body's meridians, lower stress, and promote deep healing.
Yeah.
It raises an incredibly important question about the exact inverse of that process. If reading 4 lines of beautiful imagery can physically open your energy pathways and relax your fascia, what is your daily reading diet doing to you?
Oh, that's a great question.
What is the daily relentless consumption of doom-scrolling, chaotic news headlines or passive-aggressive, stressful emails physically doing to those same internal rivers?
Wow.
Every time you read a headline that makes your jaw clench, every time you scroll through a social media feed that makes your chest tighten and your breath go shallow, you're sending biological instructions to your body. Are those instructions planting flourishing grass? Or are they building dams? Are you inviting the spring wind? Or are you locking the tension in and trapping the wildfire inside your own chest? Because the body is always listening to what the mind is reading.
Are you planting grass or building dams? That is something I am going to be thinking about every single time I pick up my phone from now on. So, take a moment right now, drop your shoulders, soften your belly, unkink the hose, take a deep, intentional breath, and let the spring wind blow all the way through. Enjoy.